tell you the story as I heard it and remember it of the Melmerby. Well, you've been at Melmerby Beach. It's a summer resort, a place of merriment and revelry and devilry. But on an October day, 89 years ago, the Melmerby was a scene of a different nature. There was a crowd of people gathered there then, but there was no merriment. The Melmerby was a 1,400-ton bark, and she left Quebec on the first day of October. She was loaded with timber, and she was en route to England. Before she got out of St. Lawrence, it seemed that misfortune dogged the Melmerby from the time that she left Quebec until her end came. For on the way out of the St. Lawrence River, the youngest member of the crew, a 16-year-old English boy by the name of David Evans, was sent aloft, and he slipped and fell and come down and dislocated his shoulder and injured his head on the deck. The captain, there was no doctor aboard, and the captain, Captain Olsen from Denmark, pulled the leg in place as well as he could, but the boy was suffering terrible pain, so therefore there were one crew member short, for he was in bed. Not many days out of Quebec, they ran into heavy weather, and when they got out by Anticosti Island, they were in, things was coming overboard, and they were in a bad storm. Now, I heard the story from men who was in living at the time. When I was a boy, in fact, my father, your great-grandfather, was one of the men on the shore the last days of the wreck. But I heard the story, and the way it was told to me, the ship itself was loaded sloppily in Quebec with timber. They didn't do it in the right way. She was not fastened or wedged enough in. And when they got out into the Northumberland Straits, or the Gulf of St. Lawrence, really, they were in, they misjudged the weather. They didn't think it would get so bad out there, and it was really rough. And the timber that was poorly put in started to move, and she shifted her cargo. And Olsen told the mate to tell them to jettison, that is, throw over some of the timbers. And in the throwing over the timbers, they didn't take care enough, or they got panic or something. They smashed 2 or 3 lifeboats on one side and damaged the rail of the ship. But he kept on going, and the weather was getting worse. He decided he'd steer a course for Hawkesbury, or Sydney, I believe he was going to steer a course for. He'd steer a course for Sydney and get in there. He met a Norwegian boat someplace after he left the mouth of the St. Lawrence, and they asked him if he wanted help, and he refused help, saying that he would go to Sydney. But he was getting in worse trouble, and some 3 or 4 days out, he was a small schooner caught up to him, going the same way. Her name was the Mary, and she was, her captain was Captain Boudreau and his 2 sons, and if they'd any more crew, the men that told me of the story didn't know, but they knew he had 2 sons aboard him. And the Frenchmen come close enough to the Melmervey that they could speak one another. And he told the captain he thought he'd better steer into Hawkesbury or Pictou. And he told him he didn't know how to get into Pictou, the captain of the Melmerby, and would he, Boudreau, come aboard and help him. And it was said afterwards, I heard my father saying that Boudreau had said, if he knew the condition the Melmerby was in, he would never have went aboard. But they didn't really, pardon me, he didn't really ask him to go aboard. What he asked him for first was, would he stay along with them and tag along and pilot them into Pictou that way. This Boudreau refused to do, because he knew the storm was getting worse. He only had a small schooner, and he didn't want to jeopardize her out there, so he let the sons take the schooner. And he got one of his sons, take him in a little boat and put him aboard the Melmerby. When he got aboard the Melmerby, then he seen where he made his mistake. However, he started and they were going to go into Pictou. Now the two sons, the two young French fellows, with whatever, if they had more crew, they went on. They could make it in better weather. They weren't crippled like the Melmerby was. And let me see how many days it was. I believe it was 5 days out of the Gulf, out of Quebec they were. She was leaking bad. The pumps couldn't keep her clear. And the deck lashings was all practically off of the load they had. The house was smashed, the deck house. And the Frenchman, or Captain Boudreau, told them that they have to get her worked into Pictou. In the meantime, they lost the rudder, just getting close into Pictou. He lost the rudder, and he was trying to steer her. Apparently, Boudreau had charge of the ship. He was trying to steer her by his sails, which is even a tricky thing to do in calm weather, I would think. But he did pretty well, but he was driven east of Pictou Harbour. And at that time, the woods all along the shore from Little Harbour right to King's Head was all woods. The shoreline, was all wooded right down, and there was no farms that could see the water. And the first people to see them, I believe, was on a Sunday morning. The people on the west end of the big island, the Hendersons, looked up in the morning and they seen a ship about 300 yards offshore in trouble. And they knew that, they didn't know it was the Melmerby, but they knew that there was nobody could get out to them because the storm was terrible. And it's a funny thing in those days, without telephones or any means of communication, how fast the news travels from house to house. Because by Monday morning, I think it was Monday, if I remember right, yes, it was Monday morning, there was a crowd on the shore of Melmerby Beach. How they come? They came by horseback, and they came on foot, and they came by buggy and horse. And they came under every conveyance that you could think of. But nobody could do a thing. There was no small boats on the shore, no boats within reach of them. Nobody came in a boat because it was impossible. The sea was too bad. And on Monday evening, they could see the men sitting out there on the wreck looking towards the shore and couldn't do a thing for them. But Monday evening, I believe it was, that they got a lifeboat over and took her up to the side of them, lowered her over the side, and according to the story of the old-timers, the first man to leap into it was Captain Olson, the captain of the Melmervey, which was strictly against the rules and the laws of the sea. And yet he jumped in, and whether they got panicked or not, nobody knows, but 15 men jumped in that lifeboat before they got her shoved away. They were jumping off her as fast as they could, and they shoved the boat away, and she started to come in, and she didn't get more than a few yards when she rolled, a big sea struck her, and she rolled over and dumped the whole 16 of them into the sea. The people on the shore seen it, they couldn't do a thing, and they seen the boat was coming ashore, and when she got about 100 yards from the shore, they saw one man was hanging on her. And he was still hanging on. When she was getting closer, and the waves was, I don't know how high, but I guess there were 10 and 12 feet smashing on the shore. So the story is that they made a human chain, that is, they held hand by hand for a way back, the crowd did, till they got to the edge of the shore. When the boat came, the man that was in the first man on the chain grabbed the boat, and they all went back. But I just can't credit that story, because a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and that first man out there would be knocked down by that wave, and what would happen, he'd just get thrown back unless another fellow grabbed. Possibly that's the way they did it, but whatever way they did it, they got the boat ashore and they got the living man ashore. The only man that survived at the 15, and he was a crewman. Now, there was 6 men, I believe, left aboard the boat, and the sick boy, and they took him up and they hid him in a mattress because she was full of water below. Now, I heard my father saying on Tuesday, I believe, that would be 3 days after that, he was down. How he got down went to New Glasgow, I guess, Tuesday, the 14th of October. And the gale was still blowing. And they fixed the lifeboat that the man came ashore in. They repaired it. It was smashed when it hit the shore, but they repaired it and worked on it. They had it ready to go. There was calling for volunteers. Nobody seemed to volunteer at the time, but one of the Boudreaux boys that took the schooner home was in Pictou, and he thought that maybe they were still coming in, and he didn't hear for a day or two that the Melmervey was east of Pictou and on a rock and was going to pieces, and he walked from Pictou to Melmerby. And when he got to Melmerby, he snapped them into attention. Now, that was the last day, and I heard my father telling about timbers was coming ashore, great big timbers and lumber was coming ashore, but they were still clinging to deck, these 6 men and the boy. And when young Boudreaux came, Alfonso Boudreaux was his name, when he came, he said, somebody's got to go out. I want volunteers to take a boat and go out. Now, I'm a little ahead of my story. The evening before this, 2 men, Samuel Cook and James Fletcher, both been strong swimmers, decided to try to brave the waves and the breakers, and they dived overboard, swam ashore, and again the local people that was gathered on the beach formed a human chain as they was coming in, grabbed them by the arms and took them also ashore. This left, I believe, 5 men aboard the ship, and one of them was the injured boy, David Evans. So to get back now to young Boudreaux, when he asked for volunteers for to vote with him, 5 Pictou County men agreed to go. There were Dr. McLean, who was a dentist in New Glasgow, Captain Peter Graham, who was the steersman in the stern, and young Boudreaux pulling on the oars. David Fraser, machine shop foreman, and a man by the name of Watkins Williams. He was a deckhand from a steamer that happened to be in Pictou Harbour. And there was also with them a fisherman farmer from the big island of Merigamish named James McGlashan. James McGlashan, I knew him as a boy well and talked to the man. They had a rough time trying to get the boat launched, but once they got her launched and got out of the breakers that was breaking on the shore, things went smoothly because Dr. McLean was in the bow with a barrel of oil, and he was throwing it with a bucket out on the waves ahead of him, and the oil broke the smash of the breakers. It sort of calmed the sea, if you can understand, and put oil on troubled waters, and he was throwing oil on while Captain Peter Graham, he's the grandfather of Dr. Macquarie's wife, Caroline. And he steered. He was an old captain and a seaman born, and as the fisherman farmer from the big island of Merigamish was also a man practically born in a boat, while David Fraser, the machine shop operator, was a champion oarsman in races they used to have in the river in New Glasgow. So all in all, they had a very good crew. They got to the boat, and now to approach her from the side and hold the lifeboat that the guard against it was a big undertaking. The 5 men that was aboard the boat, Captain Boudreaux was one, and this is one reason I have great respect for that Captain Boudreaux, because it wasn't his ship. It wasn't necessary that he stay aboard till the last man. But he was a captain, and therefore the first thing that he called for was to lower the sick boy with a broken shoulder. And they put the mattress over and they lowered him down. Then one by one, of the men jumped in. The last man to get in the boat was Captain Boudreau. His son embraced him before they left. I said he didn't know whether he was living on the boat or not when he walked from Pictou, you see, and so he was happy to find him. Then they got in, and again they met them, but the sea was calming down, I heard my father saying by this time, and they got ashore with the survivors, the 6 survivors, or 5, whichever it was, including Evans. Evans was shipped back to England after he recovered. But I was told more of this story by Mr. John Church, who owned a livery stable in New Glasgow at that time. Mr. Church was down with an express wagon, the nearest they had to an ambulance in them days, and he took the injured boy, the Dave Evans, to New Glasgow, to the doctors. And he told me they put the mattress, or a dry mattress possibly, in the back of the wagon. And the boy cried. He hadn't showed any emotion aboard the boat, as the other survivor said. He cried all the way to New Glasgow. The Melmerby broke up completely after this. Souvenir hunters came and was gathering things and washed ashore for her for months afterwards. I heard my father saying that the heavy timber, some of them so big that it took 6 horses to haul them out of the tide wash, came ashore, and some of them came ashore on the Big Island beach. That's about 6 miles east of where the boat was. But now to get back to the first ones that left the boat, along with Captain Olson, a year afterwards, or nearly a year afterwards, in the summer of 1891, a body was washed ashore at below Lismore. Between Lismore and Arisac, there's high cliffs and high banks along the shore, and a farmer saw a body rolling in the tide wash. I believe it was in the July of the next year. They went down, rescued, took the body ashore, and they found a watch in the pocket of the clothing with Captain Olson's name and a Masonic emblem on the watch. They identified the body by that. They sent word back to Stockholm and sent the watch to his people. A year or 2 later, a young man, saying he was a son of Captain Olson, sent a letter to the Masonic Lodge in New Glasgow and asked them would they put a marker or a stone up over the grave where his father was buried. This the Masons in New Glasgow did. They put a red granite stone in the middle of a farmer's field, but there was little farming done on it at that time. It was mostly woods. And there it stood, and when I was a kid, my father always, if we were driving down that way, he would point down towards the shore and say that that's where the captain of the Melmerby is buried. And I was only a kid, I didn't pay much attention to it. But here about 25 years ago, I was sitting in Albion Lodge in New Glasgow one night, and the question came up. They were reading the minutes of old meetings, and it came up where back in 1892 they were asked to put a headstone up to captain of the Melmerby, and somebody wanted to know if anybody knew where he was buried. Well, I didn't. I was too bashful to get up and start trying to tell them because I wasn't sure. But I told them after lunch that I thought I could find it. So along with Captain Neely and a Mr. Forbes from Little Harbour and Donald MacLeod and myself, we left. On the way down, we stopped at a Mrs. Mason's. I said, stop at Mrs. Mason's, and I'll go in and ask her, because I knew her all my life. I went in, and she said, yes, I can tell you, and she told us exactly to stop at a Donald McDonald's house, and he would show us. So we did. went down and stopped it. He said, yes, away down over the cliffs. I knew when I was getting the place, my memory came back to where I knew I was getting close to it. However, we went down, and it's about a mile down. You go down great hills, almost a mile from the shore. When you're walking, it seems 2. And when we got down there, we found that bushes had grown up all around the plot. And it's rather ironic that a Mason, he's buried in the center of a field of a good Catholic, and the Catholic, for 3 generations, have been plowing around them. Whereas if he wasn't there, they could make a ridge with a tractor. In the days of horses, it didn't matter so much to them. But in the days when they have tractors, see, this big plot in the middle of a field means you have to turn a lot oftener than if it wasn't there. So we went down, we found the stone had fallen off of the base. They come back, and they had the stone fixed, pardon me. And they sent word to Norway, or Denmark, and they found out that his grandson is still living, and he wrote to the Masonic Lodge asking them if they would keep their eye on it and keep the stone, see that stayed put. So that's the end of the story I can tell you. I left a lot of it out, I guess, and I did a lot of fumbling, but that's it.